Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our listeners, and welcome to the people that now watch us on YouTube. Thanks for doing that. Another episode of our podcast, The Edge. We've got a guest here today, Sam Cheatham. I'd like to start off before I ask Sam the first question, so give him a bit of prep time. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. We've had some record months over the last couple of months. We've hit some big numbers. It's been just over a year and a bit now that we've been running the podcast, so we're really happy with everyone listening. If there's anybody who wants to come on as a guest, feel free to reach out. But Sam, I'll circle back to you. First question, same as always. Give us a bit of history about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of how your journey started and how you got to where you are today.
Thanks for having me, Jay. So my journey is still starting. I'm 23 years old. I graduated college 10 months ago, and I'm in my first job out of college. So I'm from North Carolina on the East Coast of the United States, and I've just moved to Salt Lake City, Utah for this first role. I work with ReliaQuest as a cybersecurity sales rep. And it's been a mission of mine in this first year to build a network in our industry, learn everything that I can. And I've created a podcast without, the waves that yours has, but a live show on LinkedIn where I've interviewed some people in the industry, such as Ron Sharon, Gary Rettle, Dr. Cheryl Cooper, and a few others. And it's been a really positive experience so far, just kind of dipping my feet in. So I love being part of things like your show.
Brilliant. I think, to be honest, you're probably the youngest guest we have on, or have had on so far. And it's really good to have somebody on that's kind of starting their journey, because you have a very different view of the way things are. And I think that's really good. But before we kind of get into technical questions, you're a Michael Jordan fan, right? Being from North Carolina, you must be.
And I'm 23 years old too. So it's a good year to be a Michael Jordan fan.
Absolutely. I mean,
people told me it was my Jordan year. I don't know about that.
Oh, I mean, I love basketball. Luckily enough, got to see some good players. I got to see Kobe play, Shaq, LeBron. I never got to see Jordan play because the one time I had an opportunity, the tickets were thousands and thousands of dollars, and I just couldn't afford it at the time. Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper then, I guess. You're new into the industry. What was it that why this industry? Why did you choose to do what you're doing?
So I have a marketing background and a sales degree. And, I was going to go into some industry. Obviously, you want to say you're a cybersecurity person, not a salesperson, so that people are a little bit less scared of you. And when I was in school, I did a sort of a faux sales competition where we pretended to sell a cybersecurity product. And I was very fascinated with the ins and outs of it. And the reason I chose this path was that I have a fascination and a passion for helping people. And some people that really need help right now are folks or companies who are being targeted by cybersecurity threats. It's an area where I can learn a lot of things really fast. And also the area where I was offered a job. So, part of that is by choice and part of it's by chance. But I've really enjoyed all the different intricacies of our industry so far.
I think, to be honest, a lot of us have got into the roles we're in by chance. I mean, I went to university before you were born, actually, which is a scary thought. So I went to university. I studied mathematics, and kind of in my final year of university, I pivoted a little bit and did computers because they were new back then. And then I started playing games. I really enjoyed playing computer games, and my first role really came about from playing computer games. That gave me the opportunity to learn how to network and configure computers and obviously build the hardware, get more memory, get more faster processors for my games to run better. And then my mum convinced me that there was no money in playing games, which I don't think I've ever forgiven her for. And then I pivoted over to do what I do now. So I think a lot of guests we've had on the podcast have really fallen into the role by accident. And I guess my advice for anyone starting out kind of like yourself is do something you love, do something you enjoy, because you're going to be doing it a lot of the time. But let's talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing in the industry. There's a lot of noise about things like ransomware and zero trust. Do you hear stuff about that? And what are your thoughts on it? Do you think really zero trust is a buzzword, or do you see people actually doing stuff with it?
Well, like cybersecurity has been called 12 different things over the last 10 years, I think zero trust will be called a lot of different things, but I think the concept is here to stay. I think zero trust is the future of cybersecurity. I think it's becoming comparatively easier and easier to impersonate someone, to become a bad actor. And zero trust is the philosophy that everything and everyone can be a bad actor or can be a threat to your environment. And so I don't trust any of it. I'm going to verify no matter who it is. I double, checked the link before I joined this Zoom call to record a podcast with you. When I get a confirmation email, I think, am I sure I ordered something? I think I trust very little, and eventually we'll all trust zero.
I think that's a really good mindset. I was on a presentation recently, and we were talking about how the world's changed and how a lot of what me and John done in our careers was based on trusting everybody. I mean, we created global networks, either MPLS or later on SD-WAN, and you would just put people on your network. I mean, I even remember anybody visiting just came in a meeting room and plugged the network cable in. They got an IP address and they were on your network. And there was no, I don't think it was safe back then, but we just assumed it would. So it's really good to hear people that are going to kind of be the next generation like yourself talking about the mindset shift and having that mindset shift, because it's hard to make a change if people don't think of it in a different way. John, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think that's a nice jumping off point. Let's talk a little bit about detect and response. I know you work at a company that does that. What are you seeing out there as you talk with customers? What are they interested in, and what verticals are you seeing the most uptake on?
So as far as detection goes, I think the traditional way is, okay, I can detect events or logs from, one tool or one access point into my network, into my environment. But now with so many different things going on, it's not always just a brute force password hack. Maybe now there's a QR code that they're trying to use on you for phishing, or maybe there's a construction worker who's not really a construction worker that's just kind of grinning and waiting outside the door. I think there's a lot more ways that you can attack an environment if you are a bad actor. So rather than just monitoring 1 to 2 tools, 1 to 2 endpoints, a lot of the customers and prospects I talk with are trying to fortify an entire environment. Where is everywhere that someone could try to penetrate my environment? And how do I see all that without having to hire 10,000 people to be watching all the time? And in terms of response, I think that's where automation comes in, because there are so many attacks. One of the organizations we work with said that they get over 6,000 logs per day coming into their security tools, right? Now, 3,000 of those are false positives because John and Jay forget their password every other day. 2,000 of those are duplicates because we have so many endpoints we're monitoring that if I do something that's big enough, it's going to hit multiple of those endpoints, and only a few really need to be handled. So I think a lot of organizations are looking at how can I automate out those alerts that aren't worth my team's time so that I can be focusing on the bad actors I truly need to be going up against.
Is it mostly, are you seeing a lot of attacks cloud-based, or is it on-prem where you have somebody, might get in through VPN, move laterally through the organization? They're probably sticking around. I think the time to dwell time is upwards of 300 days. What kind of, when you work with customers, are they mostly interested in more cloud, or is it on-prem, or is it both?
I think, we've already talked about quite a few buzzwords, but I'll give you one more, John, and that's cloud migration, right? A lot of organizations understand that even if they're not attempting to store all their data in the cloud, they can be vulnerable through the cloud. So they don't really have a choice but to migrate not only some of their data, but also some of their defenses to the cloud when they think about security. So I think cloud security is sort of top of mind. Obviously, there's a few, primary vendors. You've either got the Microsoft cloud, the Google cloud, or the AWS cloud. And each of those kind of have their own varieties, but whichever one you're migrating to, it's definitely top of mind for those organizations to be, how do I have defense on that as soon as I migrate to it? Because that's a vulnerability I don't know how to defend yet, and it can be exploited more easily.
Yeah, myself and John spoke on a CSA webinar recently where we talk about the risk of cloud, and one of the things we talked about was there's no standardization. So you've got multiple clouds and they're growing. I mean, there are kind of, as you mentioned, the top three, but there are more and more growing. People are seeing that the migration's happening. So obviously companies are moving and supplying those services because they see that there's a benefit in doing that. But there's no real kind of standardization across all the clouds. So for me, that brings a risk in itself, because if you are a mid-sized company and you want to migrate some of your services to the cloud, you may have your DevOps team putting it in some places, you may have a certain other team putting it somewhere else, but you can't necessarily hire the right number of staff to deal with all those separate clouds. It used to be everything was in your data center, and your data center was probably either in the finance office, or a little bit after that, it moved into an air-conditioned room. You could walk along the corridor, you could physically touch and see your equipment. Therefore, I remember a story where somebody clicked on a ransomware by accident, email server started going crazy. Well, what did you do? You just went in and unplugged the network cable. Suddenly you hadn't resolved the problem, but at least you stopped it spreading. You don't have the luxuries of doing that anymore. And I think we're inevitably going to continue that move to the cloud. I mean, we've seen reports recently where there's talk about people coming back in. And I think there may be some systems that people are like, okay, we need them more secure, we will pull them back in. But I still think longer term, the cloud's here to stay. It's not going away. And we will get more vendors, and there'll be more innovation, and we'll have people competing against the large three, I would say.
Yeah, and let me add something there as well. I mean, one of the other challenges is that IT organizations, let's call it a Microsoft, a shop that, you know, they built out all their infrastructure based on, you know, Microsoft tooling, and they get an ELA. CIOs, you know, is told, hey, I gotta be cloud first, so they move to Azure, and that's the focus for the IT department. IT department security probably reports into the IT department, and they're like, hey, cloud first, we're going to focus on Azure. That's where we're going to put all the training. And then you have another part of the organization that may not be reporting into IT that decides, hey, we're going to build an application. Let's call it an e-commerce application on AWS. They don't report in because they're part of the go-to-market, they're part of sales, and that reporting line isn't there. So what happens is IT focuses on Azure, yet you have AWS, and you don't have that security on, you know, the AWS side where money is being made because it's e-commerce. I think that's a growing challenge these days, as well. And you have your on-prem. It's to say that you're going to be, you know, cloud first and we're going to focus on one cloud, I think is wrong. I think multi-cloud is a reality, and the best you can do is start to focus on finding tools that can, you know, remediate things in Azure or on-prem or AWS. So you're not spreading that talent across those clouds. I think that's a challenge that everyone's trying to deal with right now, is how do you figure that out? And where do you find the talent?
Yeah, great question. Hard to even know where to start with that. But I think, you know, vendors 5 years ago were selling a SIM, right? And they said, yep, everything goes to the SIM, but that didn't happen. So then they said, okay, we have an EDR. Everything goes to the EDR. That also didn't happen. Now we have XDR, which is supposed to get everything from the SIM, from the EDR, from the cloud, from the firewall. That's going to get everything, and that's working right now. But that's not to say that in 2 more years, there won't be 3 more kinds of security that aren't feeding into that. And then we'll have a new tool called the balloon animal, or whatever they're going to call it then. And the idea is that everything will feed into that tool. But all those things and all those vendors are coming from the same perspective of how can we keep it secure yet simplify.
So as someone that kind of works with threat response, where do you see the most incidents coming from? I mean, we've read reports recently that ransomware is on the kind of decline, which I'm not 100% convinced about. But is it ransomware? Is it malware? Where do you deal with like the most incidents, the most attacks coming from?
So the most number of incidents is phishing. Right. There are so many ways that you can get phished or social engineered, right? You probably click on, I don't know, between 5 and 40 links per day if you work on your computer for a 9-to-5 job. and you get familiar with that, right? So when one comes, you might not think twice before you click on it. And that's part of a lot of the training that security organizations are doing for their other employees, that vendors are doing for security organizations, is, how do we not click on that link? How do we spot something that doesn't feel quite right? And there's vendors now, including the organization I work, where we have a phishing analyzer. So it's able to detect, understand all the links. It's able to see if someone clicks on one of those links that's not originally from the organization, and, isolate a host, ban a hash if you've accidentally given it access to something it shouldn't have. So of course there are organizations defending against phishing, but there's also new kinds of phishing all the time. I mean, 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought twice before scanning any QR code ever, because it looks fun. I mean, it's fun to click on. You get to scan it with your little camera, and then you get to do 2 clicks and you're on a fun website that, gives you a free song for the day off Apple Music, or it lets you connect to someone on LinkedIn, or puts their contact in your phone. But now, if an unlabeled QR code, that sends up red flags for me. That's like, well, I want to know what this is first before I think about clicking on it. And I think phishing is something that's evolving so quickly, and something that so many people are being tested against, that we can't expect everyone not to click that link every time.
I think it's a real challenge, because I've spent maybe 10 plus years getting people to do training on things like phishing and just cyber in general, even before it was called cyber. And we would run a test every year, and we would get the same number of people, and normally the same people fail every year. And we were trying to make the training a bit more exciting, because I fundamentally think if you just do it once a year, people just go click, 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 click. They don't really read it. They just take the exam and they pass. It needs to be, and I don't want to necessarily punish people. I think I need to phrase this carefully, because it needs to be fun, but there also needs to be some kind of way of stopping people continually doing it, rather than there necessarily be, you clicked on the link, you're fired. Because there are a lot of people that work I've come from manufacturing organizations, legacy equipment, people that have worked there for 40 plus years of their career, aren't that familiar with computers, and maybe even panic a little bit if they get an email, or if it looks like it's come from the boss, or it's a HR thing and it says do this, do that, do this. They may only check their emails once a month on like a shared machine, and all of those kind of things. And it's kind of, in general, those users that tend to give away the details a little bit more. Although I have seen very senior management do the same thing. Is there anything you can think of, rather than just get people to repeat the same kind of boring training every year? Is there anything you can think of? And I'll ask John this as well after, to make it a bit more fun, to make it so you actually learn, because they are getting really difficult. Like, they've gone from somebody in Africa wanting to give you $10 million with loads of spelling mistakes and very easy to spot, to now I get text messages from the tax office in the UK on the date my tax is due, saying your tax is due, can you just click this link? It's getting really difficult. So how do you suggest maybe we make it easier for people to learn? Is the best way, I think.
2 things popped into my head when you said that. One is zero trust, right? We don't trust links. Hover over the link, see what the link is, see if the link is from the organization that it said it was from. I mean, that's a test every time. You can do it on your phone, you can do it on any device. You can hover over and just make sure that if I get a link from Jaye.com, that it's actually Jaye.com/taxes are due, not john.org/2340619. Like, what is that? The other thing is, train people when they're young. People are 9 years old, you're getting an iPhone, right? That didn't used to happen. And I think if that comes as part of the first time you experience technology, it's going to be stuck with you a little bit better. It's a lot easier to train a 10-year-old on something than it is to train a 54-year-old employee that's been doing the same job for 25 years, just because they're subject to learning new things. And part of, hi, child, I'm going to, get you an iPhone, should be understand that there are parts of having a phone that aren't safe. And of course, social media is part of that, but also links from people you don't know, sites that you've never heard of before, can be bad actors. And a tiny bit of cybersecurity awareness training for 9-year-olds might just go a long way.
Yeah. So John, what do you think we should do? Because no doubt I saw you nodding when I was talking about people failing every year. What do you think we should do?
Yeah, I mean, it's I was at a conference, maybe it was about a year ago, and there was a company that presented, and their solution was to gamify it. So instead of having to do the common, let's call it HR training, where it's the same for harassment, the same for all the other types of HR things, where you spend 45 minutes and someone's talking and it's clicky on the multiple choice questions. They came up with a great idea to gamify the whole thing. So it's a continuous game. And as you start to level up, you get better at it. You learn more about phishing. You learn more about some of the cyber attacks out there. I thought it was a brilliant solution, a brilliant suggestion, because so often in cyber, it's all about technology. It's all about, hey, EDR, MDR, AI, blah, 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 firewall this, firewall that. And instead, they're going after the weakest link, and that's the human side. It's a company called, I believe it was called Hawks Hunt, out of Sweden or Finland, one of the Nordic countries. But it was a brilliant response to, hey, we've got a problem, and the humans are the problem, so let's train them, and let's do it in a way that's fun, exciting, and not that standard 45 minutes of HR talk. So that would be my solution, and leverage it with the kids. Get it into schools. I think, to your point there, Sam, more training in schools or more training at a younger age, it helps develop what we've talked about at digital citizenry on this podcast often. And we really need a program around that. We really need to train the generation coming up, because their minds are still malleable. They suck in this amount of technology and information. And if you do it at an early age, they get it. And I think that's a huge component of this cybersecurity problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think technology and children is one of those things we need to concentrate on. I remember having to have conversations with some of my friends' children when they were relatively young about whatever you kind of take photos of and put out there on the internet is there forever. I mean, and it will spread really quite rapidly. So you need to be careful. So they are starting to understand the risks. I mean, we've talked, as you know, John, before on the podcast about children needing MFA to play games and all those kind of things. And I think for me, we don't want to frighten people, but we do need to explain. And it's the same with children of everything, even if they're putting their hand in the fire or whatever. You don't necessarily want to frighten them, but you do want to warn them of the consequences. So Sam, before we get on to some questions about your LinkedIn, because I see some of the stuff you post I wanted to talk to you about. You said yourself you've recently kind of got in to cyber. So from someone that's relatively new, because it's pointless me and John sometimes trying to advise people what to do when we've kind of been embedded for a long time, what would be your recommendations to someone that's trying to get in? What did you do that worked well to kind of find your first job? And what do you think you did that necessarily didn't do well? So kind of what advice can you offer?
I am lucky that I get to advise a lot of people. Being someone on LinkedIn who talks about cybersecurity, a lot of people send me direct messages and say, Sam, you don't know me, but I really want a job in cybersecurity. How do I help? And the way I frame it for these people is that you probably already know, or you will soon know, the person who's going to give you your next job. And applying for 200 plus jobs using LinkedIn Apply, using Indeed Apply, using sites that apply is probably only going to yield you 3 to 4 interviews. The success rates are low, and they're getting lower. But the way that a lot of people that I know found their jobs is by knowing the right people. So having a presence on LinkedIn, having a presence in the community that you want to get the job in, and meeting and networking with people who either have your dream job, hire for your dream job, or manage the people who do your dream job is the way to get in. People have kinship towards other people, even if they don't know them yet. Jaye and John, I've never met either of you before today, but if one of you sent me a friendly message and said, Sam, I really want to get a job like yours, just my instinct is going to be to tell you how I got my job, to recommend you, to think of you the next time someone at my work says, oh, we're hiring. And I think making those connections, regardless of how personal they are, obviously the personal, the better, is the right way to start. So I've coached a few people to, make a short list, make a list of 10 organizations that you think you would want to work for that are hiring, and go connect with the cybersecurity manager, go connect with the help desk manager, connect with every recruiter you can find, and then find someone who does your job today and say to those people, can I have a few minutes of your time? I want to learn about your company. I want to learn about your job because I want to do something similar. And a lot of those people are going to tell you, yes, you're going to get a lot of good insight. You're going to get some favor, and likely someone is going to try to help you. And a lot of times you do need that help, because just applying for jobs is not a good way to get jobs anymore, which is baffling to me, but that's the way I understand it to work.
I think
and
there's,
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think there's two things I want to pull out from that, or at least comment on, and then I'll hand the floor to John. And number one is, I got my job doing what I'm doing now because of the people I've worked with in the past, right? And
Yep.
I believe John did as well, and John can comment on that in a second. But also, up until I got this role, I wasn't that active on LinkedIn. I saw LinkedIn as a place that you would go to get a job. And I never made any connections, because the only people that ever wanted to connect to me when I was in the corporate world were someone that wanted to sell me stuff. And I didn't want to connect to people. Now I've probably got 10 times more followers than I did then. And I have some people that approach me and say, I like what you're doing. I've listened to your podcast, or I've seen what you've done on LinkedIn. Could you probably help me with a role? Can you help look at my CV? Can you do this? And it's getting to the point where it's actually quite busy to keep up with all of those. But I tend to try with the people that have approached me in a nice way, whether I know them or not. If they've approached me and said, I really like what you're doing, can you offer me some advice? Can you mentor me? I've even had phone calls with people that I've never met before to try and help them. That is a good approach. What doesn't work is just sending your CV to me and saying, do you have any jobs? Now, please put some effort in for anyone listening. I'm more than happy to sacrifice some of my time outside of working hours to talk to you, to talk through your CV, to possibly tune it a bit, to talk about roles in cyber or roles in networking or infrastructure. I have no problem doing that, because people have done that for me in the past and I've valued that. But if you're just going to send me your CV and say, give me a job, and not even that doesn't even happen all the time. Maybe I just get a CV with no comments. That's not going to work. John, I'll pass to you. I believe you did get your job through knowing people, right here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it goes a little further than that. Every person you meet, whether it's on LinkedIn or in face to face, or at a conference, or it could be meeting a vendor. You've got to look at them and you've got to kind of go with the impression that you want to be their friend, you want to help them out, or they're going to help you out, because at the end of the day, these things all kind of come back. In Jaye and my's industry, surprisingly, you think it's large. It's actually really small. It's a small niche of people, and they rotate through companies. But everyone, if you make a good impression, everyone's got everyone else's back. And what you do in the past, a lot of times comes back to the present. A great example of this, I was down in San Jose this week, meeting with a gentleman for Jaye and my company that we work for and that provides our paycheck. Recently got purchased by a large networking company. So I'm sitting down with him, having a conversation. First time I've met him, and we're at dinner, and he tells me this story that he met some guy from Columbia Sportswear, and he, this story to him was amazing, and he keeps telling it again and again to other people, and pretty much goes like, hey, we've got this product, this controller type situation. And he asked the person from Columbia Sportswear, goes, how often do you want your engineers to interact with that? And the person said, I never want them to. I want them to do it as infrastructure as code. I want them to stay away from the clicky and just basically do this through a Git, repo, so on and so forth. And he goes, oh, and I said, oh, really? Who was that person? And when was that interaction? And he goes, about 2018. I looked at him and said, you know who that was? He's like, no, who was that? I said, that was me. So these conversations come back again and again with you. So it's always important to make a good impression, to reach out to people, because you will be surprised in the industry how small it is and how tight knit it is and how many interactions people have between companies. So that's my response. That's my recommendation. Always go make friends, and leave a good impression. Don't burn bridges.
Yeah, and I think you've highlighted something else for me, and it's sincerity. I mean, we've only met twice, I think.
Yeah,
twice
in for
in a
reals.
year.
Yes,
In a year. Coming up third time soon, hopefully.
Mhm.
But I've been around long enough, and I think you've been around long enough, that I knew within 10 minutes I'm going to like this person, because you tell the truth, you're honest, you're sincere, you're empathetic. Whereas there are people in the industry that I've bumped into that somebody will have a completely different impression than I will have, because they've not necessarily been truthful with everybody. So just be cautious of that. Okay, so let's get on to kind of one of the things you've got on LinkedIn, and you talk about burnout prevention, and we talk a lot on this podcast about burnout. And I'm going to try and phrase this as well as I possibly can so that I don't offend anybody. But you've just said you're 23 years old and you're already considering burnout prevention. Now, I had no idea what burnout even meant when I was 23 years old. I didn't really know what it was until I was probably in my 30s, and I suffered it because I'd been running at 150 miles per hour for years and years and years, and then suddenly, bang, I was burnt out, and I didn't know what it was. I was exhausted. I would go on a holiday and not really recover. My mind wouldn't recover, and I didn't understand why. And I'm not very good at relaxing. I'll be honest enough to say that. I when I go on holiday, I tend to want to be very, very active, and I go hiking and we go walking, and I want to see things and I want to experience everything. I'm one of those people that, in fact, my girlfriend says I've got a grasshopper mind because it bounces all over the place and I want to do everything. We're going to Jordan in the next couple of months, and I've already got the guidebook and I've already gone through and marked everything off. So I've got that kind of want to do everything personality. But it does concern me a little bit that somebody at 23 years old even knows what burnout is, or even is considering how to prevent it. So I guess my question is, why is it something that you even think about? And then leading on to that, what do you do to prevent it?
So a lot of people in our industry are burnt out. I learned that pretty fast. A lot of people are exhausted. They do the same task over and over. If you're an IT help desk analyst, you've seen 10,000 of the same tickets in the last 25 working days, and they're burnt out. They're frustrated. At ReliaQuest, where I work, we have a mental performance coach. His name is Darren. We call him DMAC. And he shares a lot of good research on how to have a better mindset, how to not burn out. And one of the most fascinating things he shared is, you've both heard work-life balance.
Yeah.
And he actually disputes work-life balance in favor of a term called work-life presence. So work-life presence is having clearly defined stretch goals that are important to you, both in your personal life and your professional life. So I want to, meet X number of people. I want to have X number of LinkedIn connections. I want to close X number of sales, but I also want to run a triathlon this year. I want to spend more time with the people that matter to me this year. And I want to play softball with my friends this year. There are things both that I do at work and that I do that are not at all about work that I'm striving for. And having the presence to be part of both of those things helps you from thinking about work when you're at home trying to go to bed at night. And that in turn can help you from burning out. So obviously I like my job. I'm fortunate to have a job that I like, that challenges me, that's different every day. But some people don't have that. And the way to balance that is to have things that aren't at all about your job, that are your goals, that are important to you, that you're going to be thinking about, and be present with those other things when you're not at work. So that can make you a better brother or sister or spouse or daughter or parent. Whatever you may be doing is better when you're able to be present at your work. You can still do your work well and then leave it at work and be present with other things that don't have a thing to do with work. I know people that are, on their Slack channel or on their Teams channel at 2 a.m., thinking about what's going to happen the next day. And that's how you burn out. It's by not having another piece that is just as important to you as your work. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's where my mind sits.
No, I think it's very good that businesses are starting to consider it, because I've managed teams pretty much all of my career, and it was definitely something that was on my mind, having gone through it myself. So we do work in an industry where we tend to work in a job we're very passionate about, and therefore it's very hard to kind of let go of that. But what I used to try and do with my team was, if they put in extra hours at a particular time because we had an intense project or we had to work late or we got compromised or whatever it might be, try and give them back time, let them spend time with their families. It was very important. I used to give my team their birthday off every year. Not as holiday. I just didn't let them work on their birthday. And if they were married or in a relationship, I let them take their partner's birthday off as well, to go and spend time with their partners. And yes, I couldn't do it if they had children, because if they had 1, 2, 3, 4 children, I might be giving them 6 days off a year, and that gets a bit problematic. But I would try and encourage them to go away and spend time away. However, even I struggle now when things get really quite intense and when there's a lot going on. It's really hard to kind of take that separation. But John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I love that. I love that concept, Sam, that you just brought up. I mean, it reminds me of how, traditional work is treated. I don't know if you watch the show Severance. It's on Apple TV. But essentially the concept is when you go to work, your mind is wiped, and then when you come out of work, you're restored. So you don't disturb that work and life separation. And that's honestly how businesses treat, maybe I'm generalizing, but that's a lot of times how they treat work is a separate realm. Life is a separate realm. Don't interact the two. And if you interact one or the other, it's especially if it's your personal life bleeding into your work life, we got to have this hard conversation. But I think your concept there is essentially right, that you can't separate the two. The two bleed over. Maybe it's work over to life and life over to work, and trying to integrate the two and not create that separation, I think is a very important concept. And being present is another conversation a lot of people are talking about. So I love that concept. And honestly, I'm going to steal it. So.
Yeah, John, you have to set those clearly defined stretch goals. You got to know why you're not, why you don't want to be at work right now, because you got something else to do. And you got to know why you want to be at work when you got something else you could be doing. It attaches meaning to both working and not working. Yeah. And that can keep you from burning out.
Okay, I think that's a really good topic. I could spend hours talking about that, but I want to ask you kind of one more question about your LinkedIn before we get onto fun stuff. And that's support girls on the run. Give us a little bit about what that is and why you're doing it.
So Madison, my partner, my girlfriend, is a runner. She has 2 different size feet, and she hasn't had equal opportunities to run in her life. And she is running a marathon, the New York Marathon, in November on behalf of Girls on the Run. And she and I are both raising money for that organization. Girls on the Run helps young girls and women to learn skills in communication, friendship, and do so through running while they're in school. And it's a great organization, and it's something that I personally contribute to, that Madison contributes to, and that I definitely support. So, when people go to my profile, I want them to see Girls on the Run, learn about it, support it. There's a lot of different ways you can support. I do have that campaign on top of my LinkedIn. Of course, you can make a contribution or a donation if you feel willing, but there's Girls on the Run chapters all over the United States that need volunteers. There's a lot of ways that you can help. And it's a cause that I feel very passionate about.
I think that kind of pivots back to the previous conversation about like this work-life balance situation. Is you've clearly got something that you're very passionate about that is outside of work, and that obviously takes up time, but it gives you that kind of freedom in your mind to think about things other than work. Now, I've never been able to run. I for whatever reason, it hurts my knees. And I know, John, I believe you used to run before you cycled. But I like hiking. I like going out, and in a few weeks we're going out. So I think that's a really good cause. Okay, so some fun questions, because I've looked down at the clock. As always, time's flying. Your profile picture is a picture of you with an arch in the background, and I love traveling, and there are certain areas of the US that I'd really like to travel to. Where is that? Because it looks spectacular.
So that picture is the Delicate Arch at Arches National Park, and that is in South Utah, about a couple hours drive south of where I live. It's in Moab, Utah. There are 5 United States national parks in Utah, and that's one of them. And it's all red rock sculptures. It's a very beautiful place to visit.
Yeah, see, I've been to the Grand Canyon, which was on my bucket list, but there's a whole bunch of places in the US that I'd love to just get a car or get a camper van and drive around and have a look around. And I'm sure at some point I will. But I'll ask one more question before I pass to John. It's obviously got to be about food. I used to ask what was the best food you've ever eaten, but I don't do that anymore. It's going to be, what has been your best food experience? And that could be because it was a picnic next to that arch, for instance, and it was spectacular, or it could be something you've done with family or friends. But what was your best food experience?
I love to cook, so my best food experiences have been cooking, and my best dish is homemade chicken Alfredo. So I won't go into too much detail. I don't want to give away the secret recipe, but it's quite good, and it's a weekly dish around our house.
Nice. So we're all going to be at RSA, I believe. So bring some with you, and we'll try it.
Deal. It sounds good.
But John, I'll let you wrap up with a final question.
Yeah, so you've obviously moved from Utah. You previously lived, I believe, in North Carolina. Do you have a preference? Are you've become more of a West Coast or out here in the high desert, or North Carolina is home? Or what's your preference?
I really like Utah. I've had a great experience here so far. There's so many new things to do. I love to ski, and we've had the best winter comfortably of my life for skiing. Oh, yeah. And it's given me opportunities to travel places that used to be a really long way away. So I hope to spend a lot more time in the Pacific Northwest and just out west in the next couple of years.
So I skiing.
That,
sorry, go on, John.
I wanted to bring up skiing. What's your favorite mountain in Utah? There's so many to choose from, but what's your favorite mountain? Where the place to go and why?
It's a tough choice, and honestly, you can take your pick, and I'll be happy with it. I really like Brighton Resort because even when I go on the weekends, there are not a lot of lines. I'm a moderate tier skier, so I don't need anything that's too crazy, but it's a lot of fun at Brighton Resort in the Cottonwood Canyons.
Nice, good choice.
I was going to say that I've snowboarded in Mammoth before, and that's kind of where I first learned properly to snowboard, although I'm not very good. They've had absolutely record snowfalls. Have you had similar amounts where you are, like crazy? Like Lake Tahoe had like 20, 30 feet or more.
Yeah, we've had a 700 or 800 inch winter, depending on which resort you go to. So it's been a record setter. I think it's the most in 49 years.
It's absolutely crazy because we get like 1 inch in the UK and everything stops. And when I mean everything stops, I mean literally no trains, no buses, no flights, everything stops. People panic buy, people go to the shops, they start like stocking their shelves, and you wake up 2 days later and it's gone. And I mean, I know, John, you get like ice storms, I believe, is what causes most of your issues.
Yeah, well, we've got a hilly terrain here in Portland, and ice storms. They line the road, and yeah, you're not going anywhere. But yeah, the snow, and Jay, I don't know if you're familiar with the differences of snow throughout the United States. The closer you are to the ocean, the more water content you have in the snow. So in Utah, when they get snow, it's this incredible fresh powder, and it's the most amazing thing to ski on. It's like skiing on a cloud. So I think Sam's probably got his snorkel out there with the amount of powder that he's working with.
So Sam, I really want to thank you for coming on. It's been a great conversation, some insightful stuff. We'd love to get you back at some point, but I really want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks to both of you as well. If anyone needs help in their job search, gets a headache or a concussion and realizes they want to talk to a cybersecurity vendor, or I can help you in any other way, you can find me on LinkedIn at Sam Cheatham, and I'll be glad to help. Thanks.
Thank you.